400 Hells Angels standing in silence outside a single-story house on Birch Creek Road in Dunmore, West Virginia, was not something Dunmore had ever seen before. Not in its 91 years as an incorporated town. Not during the mine closures, when everything that could go wrong did. Not during the flood of 2016, when half the valley went underwater and the other half came out to help, and you could see from the ridge how many people still lived here, and how many of them were still willing to show up for each other. 400 motorcycles, parked 2 deep down the length of the road, the engines quiet, the riders standing beside their bikes or sitting on their seats without speaking. Some had been riding since before sunrise. The man at the front of the line had ridden through the night. Not one of them had been asked to come. Not in the way that things are usually asked. Not with a call or a post or a meeting. The word had traveled the only way it needed to travel, man to man, chapter to chapter, state to state, carried on a current that runs through certain communities the way water runs through limestone, finding the path that's already there, moving without effort, arriving without announcement. It had started 3 days earlier with a folded piece of notebook paper. Not a text message, not a call. A piece of paper, torn cleanly from a spiral notebook, folded in thirds and pressed into the hand of a man named Reese Cutter in the parking lot of a gas station on Route 39 by a 10-year-old boy named Owen Mace, who had been carrying it in his jacket pocket for 4 days, waiting for someone who looked like they might not look away. This is what was inside. The Exxon on Route 39 sat at the edge of Dunmore, where the road flattened out before the long grade up into the hills, and it had the look of a place that had stopped being surprised by anything a long time ago. 2 pumps. A hand-painted sign in the window advertising firewood and live bait. A bell above the door that sounded when it opened, and that nobody inside had noticed in years. The town behind it had the same quality, not defeated, but accustomed. Accustomed to the years that came and didn't quite deliver. Accustomed to the leaving the young people who went to Morgantown or Charleston and did not come back. The jobs that had ended. The houses that were still standing but were quieter than they used to be. It was a town that remembered what it had been and had not yet decided what it was going to become, and in that unresolved space, something had gone wrong with what people were willing to see. Not everyone, not even most, but enough. Enough that a 10-year-old boy named Owen Mace had gone 4 days without anyone asking why he looked the way he looked. Reese Cutter had pulled into the Exxon at 3:10 on a Tuesday afternoon, coming down from the pass after 3 hours on the road, heading for a chapter meeting in Lewisburg that was scheduled for 6. He was 47 years old, and he rode at 220 pounds, all of it distributed in the solid, unhurried way of a man who had long since stopped being aware of the space he occupied. Because occupying space had never been something he'd had to think about. His vest was Appalachian Riders, a chapter based out of Beckley that had been working the southern part of the state for 14 years. 3 years as road captain, 11 as a member, and before that a decade in the trades that had given him hands that could identify a problem by touch, and a patience for waiting out the part of a job where nothing seemed to be happening, but actually was. He filled his tank. He went inside for coffee. He came out and was adjusting the strap on his saddlebag when the boy appeared at his elbow. Reese had not heard him approach. The boy was small, not fragile. There was nothing fragile in the way he was standing, which was very still, very deliberate. The stillness of someone who has rehearsed this moment many times and is now executing it. He had on a jacket 2 sizes too large, the sleeves pushed up past his wrists. Dark circles under both eyes. A small bruise on the left side of his jaw that was 5 or 6 days old, going from purple to yellow at the edges. He was holding a folded piece of paper. He held it out. "Can you give this to someone?" he asked. Reese looked at the paper. He looked at the boy. "What kind of someone?" he asked. Owen Mace looked up at the Appalachian writer's patch on Reese's vest. "Someone like you," he said. "Before we get to what was on that paper, drop your city in the comments right now. I want to know how far this story is reaching. Wherever you are in the world, you're why we're here. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next." Now, back to that parking lot. Back to a 10-year-old boy with a bruise going yellow at the edges and a piece of paper he had been carrying for 4 days. Because what Reese Cutter was about to read would keep him in that parking lot for the next 22 minutes, sitting on the bumper of his bike with his hands completely still, doing something he almost never did. Thinking about what to do next. His full name was Owen James Mace. He was 10 years old and 4 months, and he was in 4th grade at Dunmore Elementary, where his teacher was a woman named Mrs. Pelletier, who had noticed that Owen had gotten quiet in October and had meant to follow up on it, and had been overtaken by the 31 other things that happened in October when you taught 4th grade and had not yet found the right moment. He was a boy who had been good at school, not at the performance of it, not at the sitting still and the raising hands, but at the actual work of it, the part where you learned something new and it rearranged your understanding of the world. He liked science. He liked the way science asked you to look at something until you understood it, instead of looking until you thought you understood it, which was different and harder and mattered. He had a habit of keeping small things. Rocks with an interesting color, a brass button he'd found on the trail behind the school, a folded dollar bill from his grandfather that he hadn't spent because it had a note on it in his grandfather's handwriting, and he wasn't ready to part with the handwriting. He kept them in a shoebox under his bed, and he knew what each one was and where it had come from, the way certain people keep track of the physical record of their life, because the physical record is the one that can't be argued with. His mother's name was Sandra Mace. She was 34 years old, and she had been alone with Owen since Owen was 3. When his father had left, for reasons he had explained in a letter that Sandra had read once, and put away in a place where she didn't have to see it. She had raised Owen in the house on Birch Creek Road that had been her parents' and was hers now, a house she had loved in an uncomplicated way when she was a child, and now loved in the complicated way of someone who understands what a thing costs. She had been working at the regional call center in Hillsboro for 6 years, early shift, and on the days, Owen didn't have the bus, she dropped him at school on her way in. And she was home by 4, and they had a rhythm that was modest and sufficient, and theirs. That had been true until 8 months ago. His name was Carl Britton. He was 41 years old, and he had met Sandra at a get-together at her co-worker's house in March. And he had been easy to be around in the beginning in the way that certain people are easy in the beginning. Attentive, steady, present. He had a job. He had a truck. He brought things when he came over. Food, sometimes, a small thing for Owen that he presented without making a production of it, which Owen had understood even at the time was a kind of performance even if he didn't have the word for it yet. By July, Carl had a key. By September, he had moved most of his things in without anyone saying that was what was happening. He was not easy anymore. He was the kind of man who did not hit in obvious ways. He was the kind of man whose cruelty had developed a vocabulary over years of practice. The specific phrase that landed on the specific bruise. The way a voice could be lowered to make a threat feel more private than a shout. The use of something small and important to make a point that stayed long after the conversation ended. He had broken Owen's shoebox early on because Owen had left it on the floor where Carl had nearly tripped on it. He had done it without raising his voice. He had said it was an accident. Owen had not put anything in the new shoebox. He wasn't ready to. The bruise on Owen's jaw was from 8 days ago. It had not been an accident. There was no credible explanation that it had been, and Owen had not tried to provide one. And Sandra had not asked him to, because she was already living in the space where the explanation does not matter as much as keeping the surface calm. Owen had understood that. He had also understood, in the precise way that 10-year-olds understand the things adults do not say aloud, that the surface would not stay calm much longer. He had written the note on a Thursday night when Carl was out and his mother was asleep and the house was quiet. He had taken a piece of paper from his spiral notebook, and he had written what he needed to write, and he had folded it in thirds, and he had put it in his jacket pocket. He had been waiting for the right person to give it to. He had known it was a biker when he saw one. He hadn't known why exactly, and if you had asked him, he could not have explained it. He had seen the Appalachian Riders once, 2 summers ago, stopped at Rhonda's in Lewisburg when his mother had taken him for a birthday lunch, and he had watched them from the booth by the window with the focused interest of a boy who was still in the stage of cataloging the world by what impressed him. They had been loud and large, and they had talked to each other the way men talk when they are completely at ease, and Owen had watched one of them lean down to talk to a small child who had approached his motorcycle, taking his time, explaining the parts of the bike with the patient generosity of someone who understood that a curious child deserved a complete answer. He had remembered that. He had thought, that is what someone who doesn't look away looks like. The note said, "My name is Owen. I live at 14 Birch Creek Road in Dunmore. My mom's boyfriend hits her, and he hit me too. She won't call the police because she's scared of what he'll do. I don't know who else to ask. If you know someone who can help, please." That was all. No last name, no phone number, just the address, and the facts, and the word please standing alone at the end like a door left open. Reese sat on the bumper of his bike in the parking lot of the Exxon on Route 39 and read it 3 times. He looked up. Owen was standing 4 feet away, watching him. "How long?" Reese asked. 8 months, Owen said. "Has he hurt you before this?" He touched his own jaw, indicating the bruise. Owen was quiet for a moment. "Twice," he said. Reese looked at the note. "Your mom know you did this?" "No, okay." He folded the note along its creases. "What's his name?" "Carl Britton." "He there now?" "He gets home at 6. Reese looked at his watch. It was 3:17. He looked at Owen. He did not shout. He did not make any large gesture. He picked up his phone and he made a call. And when the man on the other end answered, he spoke for 90 seconds and said the address and the name Carl Britton and hung up. Then he made a second call that lasted 40 seconds. Then a third that lasted less than a minute. Then he put his phone in his pocket and looked at Owen. "Is there somewhere you can go tonight?" he asked. "Not the house," Owen thought. "Mrs. Pelletier," he said. "My teacher. She said I could come to her if I needed to. Does she live close?" 6 blocks. Reese nodded once. "Go to Mrs. Pelletier's," he said. "Take your mom if you can. If you can't, go alone and tell her everything you told me." He paused. "Can you do that?" Owen looked at him. He had come to a gas station parking lot with a note he had carried for 4 days and handed it to a stranger and asked for help. He could do that. "Yes," he said. Reese held the note up. "I'm keeping this," he said. "Okay," Owen said. He turned and walked back toward the road. Reese watched him go, 10 years old, jacket 2 sizes too large, walking with his head up and his shoulders squared, the particular walk of a child who has done something they are afraid of and found that they survived it. Then, Reese Cutter took out his phone again. The call to the chapter president lasted 4 minutes. The call from the chapter president to the regional coordinator lasted 6. By 9 that evening, 11 chapter leaders across West Virginia, Kentucky, and Virginia had been contacted. By midnight, the word had reached Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee. Not a summons, not a command, a fact and an address, and the understanding that some things required presence in a way that phone calls did not. Carl Britton came home at 5:58. He found 2 Appalachian riders standing on the front porch of 14 Birch Creek Road, not inside. Outside, on the porch, in full view, in the particular posture of men who have nothing to hide and nowhere to be, and are in no hurry at all. Carl stopped on the front walk. He was 41 years old, and he was accustomed to being the largest presence in a room, accustomed to the effect his size had on people who were not expecting it, accustomed to the way that expectation functioned as its own form of power. He had walked into rooms for years on the assumption that the room would adjust to him. The 2 men on the porch did not adjust. One of them, the taller one, with the road captain patch, looked at Carl the way you look at something you have already assessed and do not need to reassess. "Carl Britton," he said. It was not a question. Carl said nothing. "There are some things we need to talk about," the man said. Carl looked at the door behind them. "That's my house," he said. "It isn't," the man said. The door opened. Sandra Mace stood in the doorway. She was 34 years old, and she had been afraid for long enough that she had started to forget what not being afraid felt like. And she was trembling. Her hands, her jaw, the breaths she was taking in small, careful increments. But she was standing in her doorway. She was standing in it. Behind her, just visible in the hallway, was Owen. Carl looked at Sandra. Carl looked at Owen. He looked back at the 2 men on the porch. "You need to leave," he said. His voice was still controlled, still at the register he used when he wanted to make something feel private. "This is a private matter." It stopped being private, the man said, when a 10-year-old boy wrote a note. Silence, the road captain reached into his vest pocket. He took out a folded piece of paper. He held it up. Carl stared at it. He didn't move. "Sheriff's Department got a copy this afternoon," the man said. "Social Services got one at 4:30. The Dawes office got one at 5. He put the note back in his pocket. "You've got outstanding warrants in Kanawha County, Mr. Britton." The deputy who's been parked at the end of the road for the last 20 minutes has been made aware of that. Carl's confidence had been a real thing 30 seconds ago. It was not a real thing now. The road captain picked up his coffee from the porch railing. He did not look at Carl again. "You should go," he said. Carl Britton went. He walked to his truck. He backed out of the driveway, and he did not stop at the end of the road or turn back to look at the house. The deputy's cruiser pulled out behind him and followed him down Birch Creek Road. And that was the last time Carl Britton was on that property. The porch went quiet. Sandra was still in the doorway, still trembling. Owen came out from behind her and stood at her side. He looked at the road captain. "Is he coming back?" he asked. The road captain looked at him. "No," he said. Owen nodded once, the same nod his mother gave when she decided something was settled. "Okay," he said. The next morning, Reese Cutter called the chapter president again. The conversation was 3 minutes long. The chapter president made 4 more calls. What happened the following Saturday was not organized. That is the precise word for it, not organized. No one made a schedule. No one drew up a roster. The word went out the same way it had gone out before, man to man, chapter to chapter, and it said something simple. Boy on Birch Creek Road in Dunmore wrote a note and handed it to one of ours. "Mother and son are safe. Come if you can." 403 men came. Not because they were told to. Not because there was anything left to confront. Carl Britton had been arrested on Friday on the outstanding warrants, and the restraining order had been filed on Thursday. And the work of the law was doing what the work of the law does when someone finally gives it something to work with. They came because of the note. They came because a 10-year-old boy had folded a piece of paper in thirds and carried it in his jacket for 4 days, and then pressed it into the hand of a stranger in a gas station parking lot and asked for help. And that act, that small, quiet, precise act of refusing to stop hoping, was the kind of thing that certain men do not know how to not respond to. They came because some things require witnesses. They parked 2 deep down the length of Birch Creek Road. They stood beside their bikes, quiet, in the early Saturday light. Sandra came out onto the porch. She stood there for a long time, looking at the road. Owen stood beside her. He was wearing his jacket, the one 2 sizes too large, and he had his hands in the pockets in the way he wore it when he was still. He looked at the road full of motorcycles and the 400 men standing beside them in the cold November air, and something moved across his face that was not the expression of a child receiving a gift, but the expression of a child receiving a confirmation of something he had hoped was true and had not been entirely certain of until now. Reese had come to the front of the line. He walked up the porch steps. He looked at Owen. "You did the right thing," he said. Owen pressed his hands deeper into his pockets. "I didn't know if anyone would come," he said. Reese looked at him for a moment. Then out at the road. "They always come," he said. "You just have to ask." He didn't stay after that. He turned and went back down the steps, and when he reached his bike he started the engine, and the sound of it spread down the line the way a sound spreads when other sounds are waiting to join it. 1, then 3, then 20, then the whole road, a single rolling wave of engines coming to life in the cold morning air. Sandra stood on the porch with her arms wrapped around herself and watched them go. Owen stood beside her. He was not crying. He was the only one. The shoebox came out from under Owen's bed the following weekend. He brought it to the kitchen table on a Saturday morning when the house was quiet and his mother was making coffee, and the light through the window was the particular pale gold of late November. And he set it on the table and opened it. The rocks were still there. The brass button. The folded dollar with his grandfather's writing. He had one thing to add. He reached into his jacket pocket, the same jacket, the one 2 sizes too large, because it was still his jacket and he had not stopped wearing it, and he took out a folded piece of paper. Not the note. The note was somewhere in the evidence chain of the Kanawha County DA's office, and that was where it belonged. This was something else. Reese Cutter had left it on the porch railing the Saturday morning the riders came, before the engines started, before the road filled with the sound of 400 motorcycles finding the open highway. It was a piece of paper torn from a small notebook, folded in thirds. Owen opened it. It said, "You already did the hardest part." He folded it back along its creases. He put it in the shoebox. He put the lid on. He went to help his mother with breakfast. In the house on Birch Creek Road, where the road outside was quiet again, and the morning was cold and clean, and entirely theirs. If this story reached you, if you believe that asking for help takes more courage than most people understand, share it with someone who needs to hear that today. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment. Have you ever asked for help when it felt impossible to ask? Type note in the comments if this one stayed with you.